You too are alone in your strangeness.
Oh my goodness. Sam.
What?
Avowed is, well, it's fantastic. It's incredible, it's amazing, it's heart-racing.
Didn't you last tell me that you thought the combat was janky and the graphics were, and I quote, crunchy looking?
Yeah, but the story does something amazing.
And what is that?
It remembers that the protagonist is a protagonist.
I have got to stop giving you the time of day.
No, come back, I can quantify that statement. Okay, so that 20,000 word Veilguard video I was teasing in my community notes had to get canned because, there's a statute of limitations on being a nitpicky wastrel about someone's work so soon after they get canned by profit-mongering corpos who replaced all their brain cells with quarterly reports. Homie, what in the name of Andres titties are you talking about? That being said, I needed to bring Veilguard into this for just a second to make a very salient point regarding something Veilguard gets wrong. And I need to bring it up because it's something that the recently released RPG Avowed gets right. So before we talk about Avowed, the Obsidian Studios RPG set in the same world as the Pillar of Eternity games, let's talk about Veilguard. Specifically, let's talk about Rook. Rook is, in essence, a pretty shit protagonist. Their background is vaguely defined and often contradictory. Elvish players get this worse, as different lines of dialogue often contradict each other on whether Rook is a city elf or a Dalish, often completely divorced by the background provided by their faction. Like, play an Elvish Ingolvar with Valasleen for a spell and see how long it takes before your backstory timeline completely stops making any sense whatsoever. I'll give you a hint, it'll be before you hit Weishaupt. This is, in theory, a way to allow players to choose and headcanon their own backstory for Rook, but it clashes horribly with the faction origin system in such a way where it actually ends up doing the exact opposite. Details that could have been left to headcanon are forcibly defined, while details that really could have used some more refinement and clarity are left frustratingly vague. But while Rook's backstory woes are myriad enough to make their own video about, their presence in the plot in the present is even more egregious. Because in BioWare's attempt to make an everyman hero,
no magic hand, no ancient prophecy,
they end up making a protagonist who has the least reason to be a part of the plot out of the ensemble. Think about it. If you removed Rook from the equation and just had a story about the Veilguard companions all coming together without you in an ensemble action adventure, what would change? Like, meaningfully? Be honest. What was so special about Rook's The Power of Friendship that the others just could not do without? Fuck, we see examples of how superfluous Rook is in the very game. If you don't help Tosh figure out their gender shit within a certain time frame, they go to Harding and Nev and realize they're non-binary on their own. Your ass did not need to be there. This is not your story. You're just shackled to it. And I should not be able to say that about the goddamn protagonist.
What about their connection to Solas and his wisdom?
Oh, yes. What would the Veilguard have done without such vital insights into the Evan Norris such as...
Elganan and Gillenane care little for the elves. They will find worshippers among those hungry for power, tyrants and bullies, the cruel and the corrupt, who fear their own vulnerability and seize any chance to feel strong.
Truly, what would we do without him? Now, I'm not inherently blaming the writers for this. Statute of limitations, yada yada. Besides, I think this is easily a result of Veilguard's absolutely bonkers dev cycle and the lingering cursed fingers of the live service iteration wrapped around its corpse. The original plans for Project Joplin did have a much stronger baseline for the protagonist and their role in the story, and a lot of the problems from Rook's backstory in particular can be traced to the faction origin system that is extremely obviously a remnant of the live service project. The boots-on-the-ground devs had to put together what they did with duct tape and the scraps of 2 previous dev cycles thanks to executive fuckshittery, and I really don't envy them for it. But the fact that the problems with Rook were born from project mismanagement instead of lack of skill does not mean that those problems do not exist or that they did not affect my enjoyment of the game. They do, and they did. But Avowed didn't have these problems. The Envoy has a pretty rock-solid foundation for where they come from. They're a godlike blessed by an unknown god, very quickly established to be practically unheard of in this setting, and a member of the Imperial Court sent to investigate a mysterious plague. The primary influence you as a player have on this is through choosing one of 5 preset backgrounds that explain how the Envoy made it to the Imperial Court in the first place. Think of the Envoy's background in the same veins of Commander Shepard's background. Shepard is always an experienced and decorated soldier of the Alliance and a candidate for being the first human Spectre, because they have to be for the plot to work, but where they came from and how they became so decorated is up to the player. Despite being more limiting on paper, this foundation gives the writers much more room to deliver what they need to. They can tell stories about the Envoy's godlike origins, about their role in the Imperial Court. They can give those stories to give the player unique potential reactions based upon that backstory and initial hook. Additionally, the foundation we're given threads a pretty deft needle of giving the writers the tools they need to tell the story, while also giving the player room to headcanon, something Veilguard pointedly fails. And most importantly, the story cannot work without the Envoy because the story is inherently the Envoy's. The story is about what's happening to them. My Envoy, this funky little sharpshooter right here, had a much more personal stake in the happenings of the world due to the ways the mysteries in her own life intertwined with the mysteries of the Living Lands. It wasn't just, well, someone has to save the world and the narrative says I'm plucky enough to do so. She was in the trenches about this shit. It was personal. And it being personal for her made it personal for me. I cared about what might happen, not just to the Living Lands, but what might happen to this little pixel puppet I was piloting. Would she make it out of this okay? Was the voice in her head trustworthy or dangerous? I've thought more about Janavari Ladir than I have about Envoy Oskun at this point, true, but I always thought about Jana in the sense of I could fix her. Elaborately headcanoning an entirely new story with an actually functional original character in Rook's place. I don't daydream about rewriting the story with Oskun, I daydream about the story through Oskun. How she experiences her story, what her reactions to the world are. And that ties into another strength of Avowed's player character writing and how the narrative handles it. Because Veilguard's biggest narrative arguments for Rook as a protagonist is their personality, their pluck, their drive, and unorthodox ideas. But because that's the only reason for the character to be the protagonist, that's who Rook has to be. The player isn't allowed to define them as anything outside of or contradictory to that, which severely restricts their options when it comes to role-playing, to the point where you might as well not have a dialogue wheel half the time. And I guess someone at BioWare agreed because you literally don't have it half the time. Meanwhile, Avowed has a pretty strict through line of what your character is in relation to the plot, but it has a fair bit of freedom in allowing you to determine who, which feels much more compelling in, well, a role-playing game. Are you an Adirian loyalist? Someone chafing at the restrictions of a courtly life? Do you have regrets? Are you prone to mercy or ruthlessness? Honest or a liar? I actually touched on an idea similar to this in my first video, in which I, in a rather rambling fashion, made the point that it's better RPG writing to give players the tools to react to their circumstances and define their own motivations, and how that can make the game feel reactive even in fairly linear circumstances. Thankfully, I didn't need an hour to explain it this time. Ultimately, I don't think Avowed is a perfect game, at least not for me. Its combat system occasionally trips into being clunky and inelegant, the crafting and upgrade system is not interesting enough to warrant its necessity, and mobility is a thing that keeps happening. If I had a nickel for every time I tried to parkour up a building and ended up dodging myself off a ledge, I would be rich. But where Obsidian succeeds is in crafting a very solid, technically impressive plot structure with a focused investment in making the player feel like they're the center of the story they're experiencing. And that comes together to create a very solid experience that I'll probably come back to at least a couple times. When my soul isn't being sucked up into the black void that is Elden Ring anyway. I go on a big tangent about well-structured protagonists in RPGs and then waste all my hours on a game where the player character is a glorified meat puppet. Make it make sense. Well, this came out of nowhere, didn't it? Still alive, still doing shit. I've got like 5 drafts of scripts in the tank, and half of them are Elden Ring. Gonna end up pivoting to build videos, I swear to God. Yeah, this was, not something I really had, like, on the list. But it was something just that I was thinking about it while playing, and I wanted to put it into words, so I made a smaller video to do just that. I'm probably gonna have something coming up later, hopefully, assuming I don't get distracted again. In the meantime, I've been Hex, and I will see y'all later. Bye.